I am going to go very, very quickly through a lot of slides so that there is time at the end for you to ask questions. Um, so if I seem to skip over something or I say something you didn't quite catch, make a note of it and let's talk about it at the end. We're going to talk about what the state of software is today. As Dick said, we talk about waterfall, we talk about Agile. I want to sort of tee up where we are today with respect to software development. And then we'll talk about the steps to DevOps and talk a little bit about how Atlassian has really been one of the key leaders in enabling DevOps through their full stack tool set. We'll talk about that as well. So just to get us started, it's probably no surprise that every industry is now based on software. Whether you are in the automotive industry, if you are making new or designing new cars, you are essentially designing computers on wheels. The mechanics of it are certainly interesting, but even more interesting is all the software now that's going into cars. And to use the Starbucks example, Starbucks relies heavily on software to enable the introduction of new products to their market, to their customers, and to create stickiness with their customers in terms of things like marketing campaigns, point of sale, payments, and in a number of other ways. And again, this is all enabled through software. So even though every company you see represented here in every industry is a hard product industry, every one of them is enabled because they have software standing behind it. The way we work today, as you can see, is that we are in a rapid area of change where organizations are recognizing that the waterfall approach, as Dick said, really doesn't work well. The problem is, as Dick had alluded to, is that even though you may know what you want today, by the time we deliver it, your needs have either changed or you've learned something that you didn't know at the start that changes the way you view the requirements that you gave us. And so what we're looking to do is to really shorten the time frame between the initial requirements and the production of something that meets that requirement so that the end customer can then come back very quickly and either ratify and validate that what we delivered is in fact what they want, or we can change and we can make that change quickly without having invested large amounts of staff resources in delivering something that no longer makes sense to the customer. So what you're seeing here is a picture of a typical Agile team wall where they're using Post-its and stickies and various manual tools to really get a handle on what it is they're developing. They are collaborating because, and I'm a big fan of using these walls because it engenders conversation. We're going to talk about that some more. Let's go ahead and make the point that we're trying to make about the value of Agile, and then we'll talk quickly about Git. Agile has been reported now that 77% of teams overall, regardless of their size, are using some form of Agile development. They may be using it in a very pure sense, a pure Scrum or Lean or Kanban approach, or they may be doing some kind of a hybrid that meets their own cultural needs and their own software development needs. But everybody is moving very quickly to using some kind of Agile approach. And secondly, we have Git, which really is the distributed version control system of choice, and about 78% are using Git. The rest are using typically Mercurial or SVN. There are certainly some outliers that are using some others, or perhaps using no version control at all. But you need to be using version control, and we're going to argue you need to be using distributed version control, which is what Git provides, in order to get the kind of productivity gains that Agile can provide to you and that DevOps will build upon. So that's basically the state of where we are today. Now, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? Initially, the idea was we want development teams. Agile is focused on development, and we want the development teams working as a team and not as individuals pulled off in their own directions without an idea as to how they're delivering. We want them talking. We want them being iterative. But the problem that we see today is that while development teams have become agile, they've left the operations organization and the customer service organization out of that whole approach. And what we see, and what we're going to argue as we get into DevOps, is that these silos need to be broken down. We need development, operations, and customer support talking to each other and sharing information, improving their processes, because you're going to find that your productivity is going to go up significantly if you can break down these silos. So what is, thinking about your organization and how you work, some questions you can ask to sort of get an idea of the health of your organization as you're starting to move into a DevOps world. Are your incident response times tied to SLAs? We have a lot of customers who do not have SLAs when we get started with them, and they don't have SLAs for one of two reasons or both. One possibility is they simply have no way to measure their SLA. They don't have the tools in place so that they could, with confidence, know whether or not they are actually meeting it. And the second problem is that even if they know they're meeting it, they're finding that they can't actually hit the SLAs that their customers are demanding. And so putting an SLA out there that you know you can't meet is a recipe for disaster. And so people are then saying, we're not going to publish SLAs. Even internally, we're not going to do that because it creates morale problems, it creates management problems. And so the question is, if you have SLAs, are you meeting them on a regular basis? Are they the right SLAs? And if you don't, is it because you can't measure them, or that you don't believe you can meet them? We're going to try and address that issue with DevOps. Is the infrastructure that you are deploying to, that your operations folks are putting into place, always under siege? Are the operations folks always fighting the next fire because they can't get ahead of the development and deployment requirements that are being put on them? If they are constantly having to put out the latest crisis, staying up until 2 in the morning, working through the weekends, you've got a problem in your operations team, and DevOps is intended to try and get at those kinds of problems. Do you find, and this is really a result of this previous bullet, that your development and operations teams are at odds with each other? It's not uncommon, because development teams are all about putting out new capabilities, new services, fixing problems in their software, and they want to get that out into their customers' hands as quickly as possible. But operations teams typically are about stability and security. And if they can't trust that the developers are giving them code that's going to work correctly, deploy correctly, install correctly, and not create new headaches for them, they're going to push back, and they're not going to be responsive to the opportunities that development is trying to match. Again, we want to address this. And then finally, are your development and operations teams able to deliver new releases to your customers on time, on the schedule that you've set, within the budget that you've agreed upon? So we want to make sure that we are being able to set ourselves up for success as we are releasing, and releasing as quickly as we can. So that's the check you want to ask yourself. And we want to say, we've talked about Agile, but what goes beyond Agile is DevOps. DevOps is this idea of building on Agile. It is not a replacement to Agile. It requires Agile, as we'll discuss, but it builds on the very cultural idea that Agile promotes, which is communication. Where Agile focuses on communication within a development organization, DevOps is focused on communication between these organizations, development, operations, and as you'll see, I'm going to argue customer support. These three organizations need to be communicating with each other in very clear, open, transparent ways. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a moment. So what do we mean when we talk about DevOps? Well, DevOps is underpinned by three principles. This is Gene Kim's 3 ways, which he made popular in the book Dick mentioned, the Phoenix Project, and is now expanded in his DevOps handbook. But it comes and it goes way back to 1984 when Eliyahu Goldratt wrote The Goal, where he was looking at physical manufacturing processes and how do you make this work. And what he said was there are 3 basic things you need to look at, or the 3 ways. The first one on the left is workflow. A workflow, in this case, looks to be waterfall. We're going to break this apart. But nevertheless, your left to right flow goes from requirements to development to test to operations to support. There's no way really around that. You must have requirements before you get started. You must then do your development. You should need to do testing. You deploy it and operate it, and finally you do support. And that is a left to right flow. What Eliyahu Goldratt pointed out and what Gene Kim built upon in his book is that we want to look at our bottlenecks. What is preventing us from moving left to right as quickly as possible? And what we find is that going from development to test and from test through deployment to operations are 2 of the most critical bottlenecks, and that DevOps is really designed to address these 2 bottlenecks in particular, but will also address the bottlenecks between requirements and development, operations and support. Going the second way is where we said the first way is going left to right. The second way is going right to left. We need to amplify the feedback. We need to move information from support back to operations, to tests, to development, to requirements. We need that feedback to go as quickly as possible. We want development to tell the systems analysts or the business analysts right as early as possible that their design may not work right or may not produce the results that they think it will produce. We need operations to tell development long before they receive development's code that what they are developing is going to require new hardware, new VM. It may require an upgrade of the operating system, or it may need extra memory, or it may violate security protocols that are in place. We want that information in development's hands as early as possible. We want tests to respond to the developers as quickly as possible so developers can fix the problems before they get out into operations. And of course, all the information that our customers give us through support, we want to flow back as fast as we possibly can. And the last piece is our continuous learning. We can put a left to right and a right to left kind of flow in place, but if we think we've done it once and it never has to be changed, we've completely missed the idea behind Agile and behind DevOps. In DevOps, we are continuously learning. We are continuously feeding back and improving our process. There is no such thing as we are done. We are always changing. We are always adapting. We are always learning and putting that learning into place. Werner Vogels at Amazon says basically his approach, and this is the DevOps motto, you build it, you run it. That is to say, if the developers who build the code are responsible for how it deploys, are responsible for fixing it, are responsible for making sure that the support issues get addressed as quickly as possible. Amazon can do this because they have built an infrastructure and a DevOps process that allows them to deliver that level of quality support. But let's see what you might be able to think about achieving. When you're talking about DevOps, here's the promise it's going to make to you. Let's look at the big number on the right first. 200 times more frequent deployments. Now, what does this mean? This does not mean you're deploying 200 releases more per year than the one you may be pushing out today, or 400 releases if you're pushing it out twice. What it really means is that you're pushing out small, focused deployments much, much faster than you may be doing currently in a waterfall approach, where you may be delivering only 4 times a year or twice a year, or where I came from in telecommunications, once a year, because the cost of deployment was so high. We're going to drive that cost of deployment way down and make it much more practical to deploy small releases on a regular basis. What does this get you to? Well, 22% less unplanned work, because you're going to spend less time doing things you hadn't planned to do. You're going to focus more on the things that you can accomplish. 24 times faster recovery from failure, because the quality of what you're putting out and the speed with which you can deploy will allow you to very quickly fix problems. So where it may have taken you a week, it can now take you a day or a half day to deploy a new patch or some new code into your environment. Coupled with that, you have 3 times lower change failure rate. This means that when you deploy, you are 300 times less, or 300% less likely to see a failure in that deployment. And then finally, that 2,555 times shorter lead time, what that really means is the time between when you get the request to do a particular functionality or particular value proposition for your customer to the time you deliver it is cut down to a very short interval. So where it may have taken you 6 months to deploy some new set of functionality, you can turn around and say to your customer, I can have that in your environment in a week. I can have it in your environment in 2 or 3 days if it's small and well enough defined that we can turn it out. That's the kind of turnaround that we can provide through DevOps. Now, this is not our pie-in-the-sky numbers. This comes right out of Puppet's State of DevOps report from 2016, and we're seeing only increases in some of those metrics as we've gone through today. So what are some of the things that we can look at? Well, if you're doing 22% less unplanned work, that means your development team has 10% more time every day, every week, every month to do things that may be of value. They can experiment more. Experimentation means they can improve quality, reduce bugs. They can invest in future quality. They can start paying down all that technical debt that you're building up because you're trying to get out new software. Technical debt is a fact of life, but DevOps will give you time to spend paying down that technical debt before it gets out of control. And really most important, whether you're in the for-profit or the nonprofit or governmental work, bringing out new features and capabilities to your customer base faster with higher reliability is really key to staying on top and being competitive in your market, however you define that for your own particular industry. So that gets us to an idea of why do DevOps? What are the things you're going to get out of it? Let's talk about what does it take to get to a DevOps environment. There are 3 things I'm going to talk about: culture, practices, and tools. We're going to start with culture, and I have to emphasize that if you were to take one thing away from this talk, it is that DevOps is a cultural change. It is first and foremost about rethinking how you do development in your environment. Culture starts with a shared responsibility. Everybody on the team, from your business analyst to your developers to your operations to your customer support to management, shares the responsibility. It is not about pointing fingers. It's not about blaming somebody. It's not about trying to shake off the problems and put them on somebody else's shoulders. It is we step up together and we share the responsibility. We win together. We fail together. The second is we need to encourage transparency for everybody to have the trust that it takes to share responsibility. They need to know that all the information they need to do their job effectively and successfully is available to them. And so the DevOps culture says make all the information available to everyone in a low friction, low cost way. We want people to actively be able to find everything they need in order to do their job. And it's a mistake for managers to suggest they know what information is needed. It is much better to put it all out there and let people take what it is they need as opposed to trying to think what do they need up front. Effective communication is absolutely essential to DevOps. Are you talking to each other? Are you regularly having conversations that will surface the problems, that will identify the opportunities, that will use the information that other teams and other individuals have to make your team and your own work more successful? And then finally, are you cross-pollinating your teams? Do developers truly understand what it takes to deploy their code and to support it? Does the support team truly understand the complexity that goes into keeping a system up and running and functioning at its peak performance? Do the operations folks understand some of the opportunities that developers are trying to build into the code when they push back against deployment requests? If you can build that empathy and that understanding across teams, everybody across your organization will start to understand not only their role within the organization, but how important everybody else's role is in the organization. One of the ways that some teams cross-pollinate is to actually move people around through jobs. So you will find in some organizations developers being asked to actually staff the help desk when they first release the code, so that developers are on the front line getting the calls back from their customer or the emails or the tickets from customers that affect the code that they've just delivered. You may find operations staff actually being put into development teams so that they can provide information on what does it take to actually deploy the new code that the development team has been asked to build. So culture is the critical piece to take away from this. And if you don't think about the cultural changes you need to support a DevOps mentality, the next two pieces will be of much less value to you. So the next piece is practices. There are three key practices we look at when we're trying to implement DevOps. The first is Agile. It's one thing to say you're Agile, but you have to do that health check and say, are you really implementing and using an Agile process? Without an Agile process that focuses on short iterations, constant feedback, continuous learning, customer responsiveness, adaptability, all of the features and the mindset of Agile, DevOps becomes very difficult for you to employ successfully. If you've got Agile, then the next question is, do you have a distributed version control system? And that sounds like a very specific idea, but in fact, it's really key, and it underpins your success, because DVCS will allow each of your developers, your teams, your operations folks to work independently so that they can do their job knowing that what they do will not affect the other people in their organization, whether it's other developers, whether it's the build system, whether it's the deployment system. And finally, continuous integration is the idea of shortening that bottleneck between development and test and deployment by automating as much of those tasks as possible. If you can automate your tests, if you can automate your build and automate your deployment to the point where it's simply a matter that a developer checks in code and all of the code is automatically built and tested and potentially, if you want, deployed, and that can be done within literally seconds or minutes instead of having to wait days for that to happen, you are now on your way to realizing the value that we had talked about in DevOps. So now let's talk about the tools, and we're going to get into some detail around what Atlassian provides. But Atlassian is that you do not need Atlassian to be DevOps, but we are admittedly somewhat biased. We think, and I'll tell you, I joined RightStar because I am an Atlassian believer, and this gave me the great opportunity to work and to continue to further the Atlassian tools. But let's talk about what does it mean to be DevOps just in general. We start with planning. Planning is knowing what it is we want to do. What are the requirements that we need to deliver? We then build to those requirements. We do continuous integration, which allows us to continuously make sure that the code that we develop builds correctly and integrates with all of the other code that other developers are building that support the system. Continuous integration also means that we automatically test everything. We do unit tests, we do system tests, we do integration tests. As much as possible, we do that in an automated fashion. We can then deploy in an automated fashion so that every time we deploy, we're deploying known code to a known environment. And so when there is a problem, we do not have to check to see whether or not perhaps there was a difference between our test environment and our production environment that we hadn't accounted for when we were doing our deployment. We then operate that code, we keep it up, we make sure that it's available, we make sure it's performing at the right levels, we make sure that it is secure, and we are able to recover from problems, and then we go to continuous feedback. So everything that we are learning is fed back into our cycle, and we start again. How does Atlassian fit into this? Well, Atlassian has products that fit into each of these areas. With planning, we have Confluence, which is where we develop our requirements and track them and then log them and push them into Jira Software for our management of the development cycle. In the build system, we use Jira Software to do our project management of the build, whether it's in a Kanban style or a sprint style or Scrum. We're doing it in Jira Software, and we're using Bitbucket, which is our front end to Git, which provides a lot of capability on top of the Git underpinning to allow us to make sure to have branching methodologies that are consistent, to tie it back to issues and tickets and stories in Jira Software. For continuous integration, we've got Bamboo. Bamboo is Atlassian's continuous integration product that can automate builds, testing, and deployment. And as you can see, Bamboo is here. Jira Software is part of your deployment because Jira Software, if you set it up, will allow you to automatically create release notes that indicate here are the set of issues, new stories and functionality, as well as user tickets that are being deployed in this particular release. It gives your release managers one place to see whether or not it's time to actually release that software. We operate it. Confluence gives us a knowledge base so that we can understand and quickly look up what are the key things we need to know in order to operate the software. Jira Service Desk is providing us with that help desk capability, including a portal where our customers can come in and log tickets and track them through the flow, the incident or problem management flow. And Status Page, which is a web-based product that allows you to notify your customers in real time about any issues that you may have identified in your environment. This will significantly reduce the number of tickets, of duplicate tickets you're getting through service desk, because your customers will be trained to first look at status page to determine whether or not there's a known outage and what it is you are going to do about it. So status page then provides full transparency and information out to your customers. And again, that we go through the cycle. Now, as I said, it's not necessary to have Atlassian tools, and each of these integrates very nicely into the Atlassian infrastructure. Whether you're using Microsoft Office for doing your planning, you're using Docker or NPM for builds, you may be using various continuous integration tools, including Jenkins and Buddy Build. You can be deploying through AWS Azure. We've got other systems like Puppet that integrate right into the Atlassian infrastructure, and so on. You can be using Zendesk or ServiceNow or Remedy for doing your help desk and still connect into your Atlassian infrastructure for supporting other pieces of the DevOps tool. So again, Atlassian is not the critical piece here, but it's one that we feel strongly can bring you value. So we go back, and we're going to talk now about, to give you an idea of how does all of this work in the real world, and I'm going to go through this really quickly because we're running out of time, but how does DevOps fit within the Atlassian way? And I'm going to take you through basically a story that takes you through a DevOps type of flow. We're going to assume for a moment that we've already got software that's actually out there and deployed in out to a customer, and some incident occurs. HipChat is Atlassian's instant messaging, real-time collaboration tool. If you may be familiar with Slack, which is a similar kind of tool, but in this case, we'll say that the incident occurs and HipChat is notified, and HipChat then sends out a notification to Sam, our operations engineer, that some kind of a problem has occurred. We see here it's been notified by PagerDuty, which is sitting out there, and it has created some information in our HipChat room to alert Sam that there's something that needs to be addressed. Now Sam is going to go into Service Desk and create a new ticket in Service Desk. Here's our Service Desk ticket. Says that there's a performance problem on cluster node 2. There's a degradation. Now this has to be worked. It is considered a blocker. That's its priority that Sam indicated, and it's a problem that needs to be fixed. So that then can be into a mobile device to notify Sally. Now Sally, who's watching a queue in Service Desk, knows that there's a new high priority issue that Sally needs to help to resolve. So now we start swarming. We are looking into HipChat, which is over here, to start collaborating on what might be the nature of the problem. We're going to send a message to status page to say, hey, there's an open incident. Let's let our customers know about it. Here it is. We're investigating this current problem. So now our customers, and this is, know that we are aware there's a performance degradation and we are working on it. In addition, we're going to look in Confluence, because in Confluence we've documented a workaround, and that workaround told us that what we need to do is bring up another node on the cluster in order to improve the performance. We may have seen this problem 2 or 3 times before, and somebody's figured out that this is a good workaround. But let's keep in mind that this is a workaround, and now what we want to do is we want to indicate that this problem should be fixed, because we shouldn't have to bring up a new node every time we see a performance degradation. In fact, we shouldn't see a performance degradation. And so we go into Jira Software, we create a linked ticket to that problem ticket, and we put it into the backlog. Now this is a development backlog in which we've determined that we're going to go ahead and fix this problem. So now it's in the backlog, and there's going to be a post-mortem. We're going to record all the different things that we want to do differently in Confluence. So I've got a retrospective, It indicates here are the things that we did well in responding to these problems. Here are things we could have done better in responding to these problems. Here's an action we want to take. And all of this is stored in Confluence so that we don't lose any of this information. And this gets to our continuous improvement flow. So now what we do is we go ahead and we start our development. Jennifer is our developer. She's going to notice that it's now pulled into the sprint, and she's going to go ahead and create a branch. That branch goes to Bitbucket. Bitbucket is our Git front end, and Git ties that branch to the ticket that was created. So now we know exactly what ticket it is. She works on it. She modifies the code. She checks in that code. And when she checks in the code, Bamboo builds it. And if Bamboo builds it and it's green, we're going to see all of that right back in Jira Software. So Bamboo feeds back to Jira Software, as does Bitbucket, that there were 2 branches created for this. There were 8 commits, 2 pull requests, 4 builds. It's checked green. We are ready to deploy this if we choose to do that. So then what happens is John, who's our release manager, looks in Jira Software and says, I've got a release, and there are 16 issues that are going to be deployed on that release. I say, go ahead, let's go ahead and build it. We push it to Bamboo. Bamboo now deploys it into our staging area, perhaps into the deployment area, whatever is the appropriate next step for Bamboo. Okay, so that was a real quick trip through a full DevOps lifecycle. What are the things that takeaways that you might want to get from this? You're going to build much more often. In fact, if you automate, you may be building a dozen times a day or more. You will find that large organizations like an Amazon may be actually running builds thousands of times per day because it's all automated, it's done in Docker, it's very cheap to build a new environment. It really costs almost nothing in terms of time and resources. Because you're building more often, because you're getting that constant feedback, because you've automated, you have much greater velocity. You're going to deploy those changes much faster into your customer environment. And each team, each developer, each organization has more independence to work on the things that are on their top of their priority list, with less concern about the implications that they're going to have on the other teams because of that distributed version control, and because the inexpensive new environments, we can keep pushing up new code and new functionality. As we said before, and this is really where we're going to leave you, is culture is key. Changing the way you think about how you develop, deploy, and support your software is the key to being successful in DevOps. You will find that you gain a significant amount of speed in the releases, in your ability to release new features, capabilities, and fix problems. You're going to have much faster resolution because what you're addressing, you have clear transparency, you have tracking between requirements to development to deployment to problems. And your prioritization, you are going to have less unplanned work, which will allow you to prioritize your value to your customers with much greater stability, with much greater confidence that you are getting those out to your customers on time and on budget. So that's really everything that I had. I don't know, Dick, if you want to take it back and talk, but we can open it up for questions for sure.
Okay. Hey, great job, Derek. Thank you very much. While people are going ahead, if you have a question, please feel free to fill out the Q&A window. Just type your question in there. But I do have a couple of questions for Derek while you're doing that. And the first one is, and Derek, we started to talk a little bit before the webinar started about an account that you were working. I think they were a small software development shop, and they needed some help. I think they were using some of the Atlassian tools, and they also had some challenges, I think, with some of their processes as well. So you went in and did an assessment for them. Could you kind of describe that process, and what are some of the potential takeaways, and how can we help an organization like this particular one?
Yeah, this organization was really interesting. They're a small development shop. They focus on developing content management systems, web-based systems, and they've got a lot of Atlassian tools. They had built this up pretty organically, and they are using them with some level of success. But now what they're finding is they're going through some growth pains, and what they asked us to do, and what we're working on with them, is now leading them from where they are into best practices, rethinking some of the processes that they've implemented, addressing some of the holes and the gaps that they've got. For instance, one area that they've been really struggling with is how to do capacity planning. They know they work on these projects, but they don't have a good idea as to what would happen if they brought in another project. Would they need to add staff? Would they be able to handle it? When would they be able to start it, given the current staffing levels and alternative staffing levels? And we're able to, using the Atlassian software, to help them to start to build the information they need to do some capacity planning. And that's one of the areas that we're working with them on.
Okay. So that would be sort of an example of what we could do for others. I think we might start with an analysis or an assessment of their needs and then follow it up with, hey, everything looks great. Or, here's some things that we think you could work on. And by the way, here's some things that we can help you with the whole Atlassian tool set.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. There's a couple of questions that have come in, and the first one here is, I'm not sure if you know to this level, what is the difference between Bitbucket and Fisheye? Those are both Atlassian.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So Bitbucket is your Git front end, and it is providing you with all the Git capabilities. And if you are doing only Git, you'll find that you can probably get away with just Bitbucket. What Fisheye does is it helps you do a much more detailed view of your code inspection. So it's going to help you to do a very detailed code inspection, where Bitbucket is going to give you some tools to support the code inspection, the code review, but it doesn't have some of the detailed analysis tools that Fisheye provides.
Okay. So that would be a reason to use both then. Okay.
Right.
It says here, what are the basic DevOps roles? For example, release manager. And let me just, before you say anything, because that's a perfect segue into, we're doing some DevOps simulation classes, and we're doing a couple in DC. It's the first one in DC. These are no cost. It's a half day session. It's modeled on after the DevOps handbook. Like I said, the DC one is filled up. Because that was so successful, we now have a second DC one. We're doing one in New York, and we're going to roll these out into some other cities. And so it really helps you understand the value of an integrated DevOps approach. And so you would be able to sit, maybe if you were a release manager in the simulation class, you might be able to sit in his or her chair. Is that a kind of a quick assessment or understanding of that? And then I guess you could answer the question: what are some of the roles, like release manager?
Well, so release manager actually is probably is not really a specific role, though a lot of organizations do have it. But a release manager often is your product owner or your product manager who's deciding when to actually release that product. So you've got at the very front end of your organization, you're going to have your business or the business itself, which typically is your product management, trying to decide what capabilities and new value should we release, should we invest in? How are we going to generate more sales if you're in a sales-oriented organization, or how are we going to better support our customers if you're in a customer support organization? From that, you move into your process managers. Typically, that's something like your Scrum Master or your project manager. And those are going to be the people who are trying to figure out basically how do we separate the work, how do we assign the work out to the different organizations so that it gets done within the time frame and budget that it needs to be delivered. You've got a development organization. We typically think of these as simply a development or development members or team members, regardless of whether they are UX designers or BAs or coders or et cetera. And then you have testers, and it's really important to invest in some testings, and particularly people who know how to do automated testing, so that you can be driving the test function and starting to make that happen as quickly as possible. You'll have your customer support, and as I said, it's really important not to forget about customer support, who is really the front line. They're the ones who are going to make sure that your customers, once they get that code, are happy, because there are inevitably going to be problems. And your operations staff, and your operations staff are the people who are going to be running this. And then everything ties back together. So these are basically, as Dick said, in the simulation that we run, we would divide people up into each of those organizations that I just mentioned, and you would then get a chance to get a feel for what does it mean to be in one of those organizations in a DevOps environment.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Well, next question is, well, you did a good job showing DevOps for software development teams. How about DevOps for infrastructure management teams? I guess, or IT operations then. What's the difference? Probably not much.
Well, I guess I'm not sure that I completely understand the question. Right. If we're talking about a software and application lifecycle management where IT is part of it, whether it's the IT operations or the IT support desk, that's all part and parcel of it. If Right. We're talking about, is there a way to perhaps bring a DevOps mindset into simply facilities or infrastructure management, I think the answer to that is absolutely. It just needs to be thought through again. How do you start to look at the constraints and the bottlenecks and break those down, and then to start having rapid feedback on the issues and continuous learning? Those are the three ways. It can apply really to anything. It could be HR, it could be legal, it could be IT infrastructure.
Right. I think that was really the answer, is that you can use DevOps for almost anything, and especially on the infrastructure management side, things are typically, especially with all the security practices in place, getting more complex, not less complex.
In fact, there's a new acronym in the industry called DevSecOps, which is trying to account for the fact that security needs to be part of the whole deployment lifecycle.
Yeah, and in fact, that's a chapter in the DevOps handbook,
right,
as well. But yeah, because it makes sense because of the complexity that's involved out there. Why not bring that into play? I mean, you could have talking about security, you could have some blind spots in your organization. Maybe these are servers that aren't upgraded to the current level, and so you can take a DevOps approach to trying to ferret out where those are. What can we do to upgrade them? Can they be turned off? And especially as the infrastructure grows, it can get a little bit out of control. So I kind of like that idea. I think that's a good one. So that is it in terms of the questions that we have. So again, I wanted to say thank you for the good questions. Thanks for your attendance today. And I would certainly encourage those that are out there, if you're on our mail list, you probably would have received, depends on where you live, but you would have received an invitation to the simulation class. So we certainly hope you can make it. Again, and we're offering these at no cost. Normally they would run somewhere in the neighborhood of about $300 per person. So it's a good deal. So as they say, enjoy it while it lasts. So, but I hope you've had a good time today. I know that every time I listen to one of these, I learn a little bit more. If you'd like to get some more information about RightStar, there's a good way to contact us, and you can pick whatever you want to do. Maybe you want to see a demo of the Atlassian tool set in more detail. Maybe it's just that you want to talk about some challenges that you're having or how you can do better within your organization. So we'd certainly love to hear from you. We hope that you can also continue to catch up with us or attend these various webinars and events that we do. And if you're on our mail list, you know what I'm talking about. There's always something going on. So that's it for me. I again want to say thank you, Derek. Great job. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We'll go ahead and sign off now, and we hope to see you the next